Hi, everybody. Welcome back to your Pro Tools lesson. My name is McKay Tabbs, and today we're going to be covering Pro Tools 101. Lesson 4 is editing fundamentals. And we're going to be talking about things like the main counters and sub counters, the rulers, different editing tools like the scrubber tool and the pencil tool. And then, of course, the main 3 editing tools, trim, selector, and grabber tools, which are the smart tools. We're going to talk about zoomers, or how to zoom. And last but not least, we're going to talk about the 4 different edit modes and what they are and how they work. So let's get started. So I want you to go ahead and look at the top of this open window here. At the top, you have counters. There's a main counter and there's a sub counter to help you to keep track of things. Right now, this main counter is set up in bars and beats. And I like to see bars and beats a lot. It helps to keep things organized for me. There's also minutes and seconds. So if I wanted the main counter to be minutes and seconds, but notice that down here, there's a sub counter, and you could have the sub counter be another count of whatever kind you want. So I'm going to make my main counter be the bars and beats. So this would be bar 1, beat 4, and then below that is my time counter, my minutes and seconds counter. Now there's time code, there's feet and frames, there's samples. That has everything to do with post-production work in movies and film. When you're syncing up video with audio, those are the kind of time codes you're going to, or counters you're going to want to have up there to help you to work with those formats. So I've got the counters set. Other things that I have control of right now are the rulers. And these are the rulers right here where it says minutes and seconds, tempo, meter, key, markers. Let's just take the minutes and seconds and follow it to the right, and you'll see that this ruler up here has the minutes and seconds. So this is 0:10, and that means that's 10 seconds in the song. This is 15 seconds in the song, 20 seconds. And if I look above that, that's the bars and beats rulers telling me that at that point where it's so yeah, when you're 15 seconds in, you're at about 7.5 bars, because bar 8 starts right after second 16. There's also the tempo ruler with a drop-down menu. This would be a place where you can make tempo changes when you need to. And then there's the meter, tells you what meter you're in. So right now the default meter is 4/4, but we could change that. There's a ruler that tells you the key you're in, default key, C major, and then markers, which we'll be talking about soon. There's a markers ruler. Anyway, these rulers help you to navigate things and keep track of things in Pro Tools. And in this drop-down menu here, you can customize which rulers you see. So if you want to keep it basic, say, all I want is bars and beats and the minutes and the seconds. You could do that. Or if you want to add the other ones in, I like to have the tempo ruler there a lot. So anyway, you can customize which rulers you see, and you do it by using those controls right there. Let's talk about some other tools that you have access to up here. There's all these buttons here, and they all do something different. We're going to talk about some of them right now. First of all, if you ever wonder what they are, you just hover over them and the name will appear. Link, timeline, and edit selection. So this button is handy if you want to link the timeline and edit selection. So what does that mean? Well, let's come here to the timeline. The timeline is the numbers that are on top of your session. So like this is the timeline. I just highlighted it. So if I want to link that, then I would, right now it's unlinked. You notice how I'm clicking, and where I click, the cursor is blinking, but the blue arrow does not follow it. Oh, it's following it now. That's scary. The cursor is blinking. Wherever I click, the cursor is blinking, but the blue arrow is not following it. If I push play right now, it will play from the blue arrow. I guess that's one thing to understand. That blue arrow on top is where your play point is going to start. So if I push play, it's going to play from there. Even though I'm clicking and selecting other places, it's always going to play from the blue arrow. But when I link the timeline and edit selection, now that blue arrow is always linked to the edit selection. So wherever I click is going to have the blue arrow, and it's always going to play from that spot. So it's a nice thing to keep that engaged unless you don't want that for some reason, but usually you want to play from where you're clicking in the session. This next button is called Link the Track and Edit Selection. So first of all, here are the tracks. So I'm going to click on a track here, and I just barely clicked on it. And notice that when I click on a different track, the first track is still selected. So I can click on these other tracks, but really I still have selected track 28, no matter what other track I click on. So when you have Link the Track and Edit Selection selected, the track selection will follow whatever track you click on. So here I am clicking through the other tracks, and as I do that, I am selecting the track that I'm clicking on too. So once again, usually you might want to have that engaged and might want to have it on, so just click it and keep it on, but you don't have to. And the next button to talk about is this one up here called the Insertion Follows Playback button. First of all, let's try it with it off. So I'm going to insert, I'm going to put the selector here, and I'm going to push play and watch what happens. Did the blue arrow move when it stopped? No, the blue arrow stayed in the same spot. So sometimes when you're working though, you want the blue arrow to follow where you stop when you push stop instead of play. So I'm gonna Insertion Follows Playback. I'm gonna click that. And now when I push play, I'll push stop and the blue arrow will follow where I stop. Anyway, so it's a good idea to have your Insertion Follows Playback button engaged. I guess you could say it's a good idea to keep all these things engaged, but there are times when you don't want them engaged. So experiment with them and start to really learn what each of them does so that you can understand when it would be best to use which one. Moving above those, we have some zoomer tools. We have horizontal zoom and vertical zoom. Let's see, horizontal zoom is these ones on this side. They're zoom to the right and zoom to the left, but they both work. Now let me zoom out and do that, and you'll see that I can zoom in very far, or I can zoom out really far. So this allows you to see, let's say I'm trying to work on these waveforms right here. So this allows you to see those waveforms really close, or to see them far away. Right now, those waveforms are kind of hard to see, but if I click on this waveform zoom in, I can zoom in and make those waveforms larger. That might be too large because now they're just looking like blocks. So if I click on the bottom side, I can get to where I just want to see the waveform, see the transients. That's probably pretty good. And now if I zoom in right there, now I can see more of the arcs and the peaks and the valleys to the waveform. And that's a good thing to want to see. There's also another zoomer tool right here. If you click on it, start with normal zoom. You can click on it and see how it's a magnifying as plus. Now hold Option and you will zoom out while you do that. So you can get this magnifying tool, zoom in with it to work on things, and then Option click to zoom out. There's also the option of doing a single zoom. And this is really handy because watch what happens after the zoom is done. I'm going to click, it zoomed, and now I'm back to the grabber hand. Yeah. So I don't have to go back up to the magnifying glass and click it off. So if all you need is one single zoom, then it can be a really nice thing to just use the single zoom feature on it. And now, for the most commonly used tools that you're going to use in Pro Tools, let's talk about them. It's these next three: the trim tool, the selector tool, and the grabber tool. These are the powerhouse tools because you can use all three at the same time when you select the bar right above them. And they call that the smart tool, because the smart tool will toggle between all three of those depending on where you're hovering on the clip. But first of all, let's just start with the trim tool. What does the trim tool do? Well, when you go to the end of the clip, you have a lot of dead space there. So with this trim tool, you can trim off the dead space. You can basically trim off the end of a clip, the part that you don't need. You could also drag it the other way and trim it back if you ever wanted to. And if we were at the beginning of the clip, the trim tool could trim that way as well. So you could trim, anyway, it allows you to trim the edges of the clips, which is something that you might need to do. Selector tool. So the selector tool allows you to select parts of the clip that you're trying to work on. So here we've selected that part of the clip. I just cut around it, and now if I click off of it, I can see that I created a new clip by cutting around it. I can't move it yet because in order to move that new clip, I need to get this next guy, the grabber tool. So the grabber tool is the hand, and now I can click on it and grab it and drop it somewhere else. So with this grabber tool, you can rearrange and drag your clips in different orders. So that's what the smart tool consists of: the trim tool, the selector tool, and the grabber tool. Let's go ahead and turn on the smart tool and use all three together. I can drag, I can trim the ends, and select. Yes, I can also make selections. So how do you do that? It depends on where you're hovering. If you hover on the top half of a clip, you have the selector tool. If you hover on the bottom half of the clip, you have the grabber tool. And if you hover over an edge of the clip, you have the trim tool. So selector's top, grabber's bottom, trim is at the edge. So it is a good idea to just leave your smart tool on and work with that one the most. That's probably the one that you're going to use the most. Now, with this certain track selected right here, if I push play right now, I'm going to go ahead and show that. If I push play right now, you're just going to hear the selected. It's going to start playing. Notice how that blue arrow just got split in two on each side of the selection I made. And I'm going to push play, and that's all you're going to hear. And when it gets to the end of your selection, it stops. Just like that. So sometimes you're working on a part in a song and you're trying to get it right and you're editing with it. So there's this thing called loop play. And when you loop play, it gets to the end of your selection and then it plays back to the beginning of your selection. So it's continuously playing over one spot in your song. That's called loop playback. And the way you access that is you right click over the play button. If you just right click, you have these options, and one of them is loop. And the loop play has a little arrow bringing you back around to the beginning, like you're looping around. So that's a nice way to work in Pro Tools, and it's a good thing to know how to do as well. There's also different scrolling options in Pro Tools. And if you come up here to the options menu, you get edit window scrolling. You could have no scrolling. And that can be handy if your session's really heavy and your computer's having a hard time processing everything happening in your session. Then you might not want to have any scrolling because that takes processing power. There's after playback, page, continuous, center playhead. Right now I have page scrolling engaged. And with page scrolling, it basically treats the screen as one page at a time. And as soon as that page plays, it goes to the next one. So kind of show you how that works. See how the screen, you see the cursor move across the screen, and as soon as it ends, it just goes back to the beginning of the next section of your song and shows you that one page at a time. So anyway, I like to have page scrolling on a lot. That's probably the one I use the most. but there's also continuous. And with continuous, your cursor is going to stay right in the middle, and you're going to see the track scroll underneath it. And then there's also this continuous page, there's after playback. And with after playback, you're not going to see any scrolling, but as soon as you push stop, it will jump to the spot you stop at. So here is after playback. We don't know where the cursor is, but I'm going to push stop. I just push stop, and that's where the cursor ended. So after playback, it scrolls to where you stop when you stop playing it. So anyway, it's good to know about the different scrolling options and to choose the ones that's going to work best for what you're doing at a certain time. And the last thing we're going to talk about in this video today is the edit modes, the different editing modes, and they're right up here in the left-hand corner. There's grid, there's slip, there's shuffle, there's spot. There's 4 of them. What do they do? And grid has 2 options to it. It has relative grid and absolute grid. And if you click on that little triangle, you can toggle between them. Absolute grid is the blue one. That's probably the one that we want to work on the most. First of all, did you notice that there's a grid going on here? I'm going to zoom in so we can see it really good. So this grid, if I click and drag a track, it's always going to line up with the grid. So this end of this track is always going to be where these little lines are. So it's always going to just fall in place somewhere on the grid. So that is great, actually. That makes editing easy. That makes it easy to line things up because if you have your bars and your beats right, it's always going to be in time with itself. But there are times where you don't want to line things up with the grid, where you want to go outside the grid, and that's when slip mode can be really nice to use. So when you drag things in slip mode, you don't have to line up with the grid anymore. You can be in between the grid lines when you're dragging and dropping things. And that can be a great way to work as well. So there are times where you need slip mode when you're editing. There's times where you need grid mode. And so you just need to know the difference between the two. Shuffle mode is a really, really cool mode. That's this other mode right here. And with shuffle mode, you make an edit. I'll just edit this part out and watch what happens when I edit it out. I'm going to edit it and I'm going to push delete and watch what happens with this part on the right. It automatically shuffles over to the left. So when you're editing in shuffle mode, here, I'll do it again. I'll do it right here at this part. Let's get rid of that. I'm going to edit it out. I'm going to delete it and watch what happens with this part right here. So shuffle mode automatically shuffles everything to the left of the screen, which once again is great. Maybe if you're editing dialogue and there's breaths or people are saying, you know, and you're trying to get those things out, delete those parts, and then it automatically moves your dialogue next to itself and takes the spot. Oh, spot, that's the last mode. Spot mode is for when you want to put a clip in a certain spot, like a specific spot. And it's really handy when you're doing video editing and because you're trying to line it up. So when you work with spot mode, you just click on the clip and then it opens up this, and then you have a time scale you can choose. Let's stick with bars and beats. And right now, I think I want to stick this right at the beginning of bar 50. So here's bar 50. Now I'm going to push OK. And now it just jumped over here to where bar 50 is. So with spot mode, you can put clips in an exact spot on your timeline. Once again, grid mode is probably the most common grid mode that you're going to want to use. And there is a difference between absolute grid mode and relative grid mode. I'm going to go into slip mode and get in between the lines again. And now I'm going to go to the relative grid mode. And here's what's cool is as I move in relative grid mode, I'm still not lining up with the lines, but I'm lining up relative to where the clip was when it started. So you can move clips relative to itself. When you're in normal grid mode and you move a clip that's in between the lines, as soon as you move it, you move it right to a line. And so you can't keep that relative space that maybe you want to keep for some reason. All right, well, that wraps it up for today. Thank you for coming to today's Pro Tools lesson, and I will see you in the next video. Bye-bye.